Welcome to the True North Country Comics Podcast, dedicated to promote Canadian comic book and graphic novel creators and supporters. I'm John Swinimer. If you want to drop me a line, you can contact me at john@truenorthcountrycomics.com. On this special edition recorded at Mississauga Comic Expo 2022, you'll hear from Scott Chantler in an author talk moderated by Stephanie Cooke. Stephanie is an award-winning writer and editor based out of Toronto, Ontario. She lives with her snuggly cat that she is very allergic to. Her writing work is featured in Mark Millar's Millard World Annual, Wayward Sisters, The Secret Loves of Geek Girls, Toronto Comics Anthology, Para Northern, and more. Her current book is a follow-up to the successful Oh My Gods entitled The Forgotten Maze. Scott Chantler is a cartoonist, commercial artist, and graphic novel creator. He's the winner of a Joe Shuster Award in the Comics for Kids category for the first book in the Three Thieves series, Tower of Treasure. Among other honors, he was nominated for 2 Eisner Awards for Two Generals, a graphic memoir of World War II based on his grandfather's experiences. In 2015, he was appointed writer-in-residence at the University of Windsor. His most current work is Bix. During their chat, Stephanie asked Scott about his approach to creating graphic novels, about his influences, about his approach to collaborative versus solo projects, and a lot more. And so, without further ado, here's an author talk with Scott Chantler, moderated by Stephanie Cooke at Mississauga Comic Expo 2022.
Where we are going to do an author talk with Scott Chantler. So, thank you for joining us. I am Stephanie Cooke. I am a graphic novelist as well, and here enjoying the show, and I'm very much excited to talk to you, Scott, and learn about all the things you do so I can apply it to my own career as well and hopefully survive and thrive. So Scott Chantler is a cartoonist of the critically acclaimed graphic novels Bix and Two Generals, which was nominated for 2 Eisner Awards, selected for Best American Comics in 2012, and voted by CBC's Canada Reads as one of the best 40 best Canadian nonfiction books of all time. His other works include Northwest Passage, nominated for Eisner and Harvey Awards, and the Three Thieves series, winner of the Joe Shuster Award for Best Comic for Kids, and listed by YALSA as a great graphic novel for teens. In 2015, he served as writer-in-residence at the University of Windsor, the first cartoonist to be appointed so by a Canadian university. He lives and works in Stratford, Ontario, Canada, where he is hard at work on his next project, the Squire Knight series of all-ages fantasy adventure and graphic novels for First Second. So please give a round of applause for Scott.
Yay. Thank you.
So happy to be here and get to talk to you again, back to back. We just talked after this sketch duel. I don't know if any of you checked that out, but
yeah, it's that was fun. That was, if you get a chance to go, I know there's another sketch duel this afternoon. If you get a chance to get into that, those are a good time. It was packed with little kids in here, just yelling out Bart Simpson and
exactly. Lots of kids who wanted to draw too with you.
Exactly. Yeah. Can I come up and do something?
I love that, passion and audacity, and it's once you get to a certain point in your career, I feel like the confidence all kind of disappears.
Right. Yeah.
And it's just I don't want to draw. Please don't make me draw.
For sure.
So you have a wide variety of books across a number of different genres. You have so many projects, but you dabble a lot in fantasy and nonfiction. What draws you to each genre?
Well, I always try to do something different with every project than what I have just finished doing. I've done a terrible job of branding myself, if that's what I'm supposed to be doing. Typically I finished about this in the sketch duel earlier, but for those of you who weren't here for that, I was a kid who always drew. My mom always used to say that if she needed to do housework or something, she could just stick me in a high chair with some blank paper and a bunch of pencils, and she was good for the day. I was basically raised in front of a pile of blank sheets of paper. I was just a kid who drew, and you probably, those of you who have children or are children, you probably have a thing, and that was my thing. And then I think the writing part of it comes in. I think the way cartoonists are generated is that, if you're a kid who likes drawing giant robots, you make up a story about giant robots, and then you get to draw a bunch of them. And I think that's how, like I say, I think that's how cartoonists are born, is by thinking up cool stuff to draw, and that kind of takes you down the writing path, right? So then you start developing your writing and storytelling skills, and the two just kind of merge and grow together from that point on.
And were comics like a big part of your childhood as well, or did you kind of discover those later on?
Yeah, definitely was always a big part. I'm going to age myself a little bit by saying that I grew up watching the old 60s Batman TV show. I'm not quite that old, but like I was a little kid in the 70s, and everything on afternoon TV in the 70s was a rerun from the 60s. And so, I grew up on that old Batman TV show. And at some point I probably realized, there are also Batman comics, at the corner store and the department store and all the places where comics used to be sold. And so I can't even remember a time when comics weren't a thing that I was aware of and reading. And of course, at some point you notice the names at the bottom of the first page, and you're like, people do this for a living. And then it's like, I could do this for a living. It's all I think it's all I ever considered even doing as an adult. I don't know what else I would have done if this hadn't worked out. I have no other skills, he said with a laugh.
You live in a constant state of fear also.
Yeah, seriously, I'm useless at everything other than this.
I feel like when you freelance, it's a constant state of terror that you live in, where it's just like, what else is there? What can I go back to?
Yeah, absolutely. If this dries up tomorrow, I'll be the greeter at Walmart or something else.
So when working on comics and graphic novels, what are some of your favorite parts of the process? And this is a two-parter.
Okay.
And then on the flip side of that, what are some of your biggest challenges? So you can obviously tackle one at a time. I feel like maybe...
Well, I will say my biggest challenge as a writer is plot. I have a really kind of natural sense of kind of structure and timing and all the things that you do after you figure out what the story is about. But just in terms of generating ideas about what happens in the story, I find that part excruciating. Like I say, once I know what the story is, I can figure out, okay, we need this many scenes, and it needs to start here and end here, and we need to cut there, and blah, blah, blah. But boy, generating that kind of raw story material, is tough. You spend a lot of time just kind of frowning at the wall and pacing around the room and kicking stuff, and it's to me that is and maybe it's the same for all writers, but I find that initial blank page, blank screen part of the writing process to be incredibly intimidating. The favorite part of making comics for me is almost at the very opposite end of the process, is once the art has all been penciled out and kind of approved by the publisher and stuff, you get to ink it, which is where you go over the pencil lines with ink, and you kind of choose the lines you want to keep, and it all kind of starts to take on a nice kind of finished look for the first time. I love inking. And like some people hate inking and think I'm crazy. But like I say, like by that point of the process, a lot of the thinking is done, and you're just giving it all a nice polish. I love the kind of drag of I still ink with traditional tools. The drag of the brush on the paper is just so kind of sensual and fun. And I do almost everything else digitally, but I still do that part with traditional tools because just pushing ink around on paper is fun. And I'm glad it comes at the end of the process or towards the end, because it feels like eating dessert. You ate your vegetables and now you get a little pat on the head and you get to eat your dessert by inking this comic that you made. And it's also one of the most fun for other people to watch. I find on my Instagram and stuff, which is about the only social media I do anymore, that's the stuff that people really like to see. You post a little video of you inking and stuff, or you post a little kind of process photo or something, and people get a lot more excited about that than they do about the rough work, because it's the same thing. They can kind of see it for the first time, what it's going to be, right? And I love it.
I think that, one of my collaborators loves the coloring part of it.
Sure.
She just says, like the lines are all there. It's basically now I just get to sit down and like it's like a
it's like when you were a kid. Just coloring.
Yeah, she just like I'll be like, oh, we should get a colorist to like make things go a little faster, and she's like,
no,
this is the one part I like.
I love
like,
this part.
This is it for me. But you have worked with other like collaborators. Like I believe I saw that you worked with like Jay Torres and like obviously other people along the way. But how is working solo versus working with other people? Like it's so solitary usually, I guess, for you. Yeah,
I've been a one-man show for most of my career, but I have had, especially early on, I did work with like Jay Torres, you mentioned in particular, kind of brought me into comics. I had sort of given up. Like I said, it was all I ever kind of wanted to do. But, in the 90s when I was trying to get started in a career, it was a weird time for comics. Some of you may remember. And kind of the, direct market superhero stuff was starting to die. But the, early 2000s book market graphic novel stuff hadn't really come about yet. And I fell into that gully in my 20s where I was like, what do I do? But Jay really, I was doing a webcomic back when only like a dozen people were doing webcomics, and Jay was one of the guys reading my comic, and he had this deal going with Oni Press for this graphic novel he wanted to do, and he was like, do you want to draw it? And I was like, let me know, let me know if you get a green light, but I was pretty skeptical about things by then, and then, he emailed me 2 months later and was like, yep, green light. So suddenly I was doing comics kind of long after I had kind of given up the idea. And then him and I did a second book together, and then I started pitching my own stuff, because the idea was always to kind of be a writer, artist, kind of cartoonist type. Collaborating is, I've had nothing, despite being, like I say, kind of a jack of all trades, one-man show kind of a guy for most of my career, the collaborations I have had with other writers have always been great. Cecil Castellucci and I did a short story, just a 5-page thing a few years back for a Planned Parenthood anthology. And we were both nominated for Eisner Awards for that, which is hilarious because I'm always doing these 250-page graphic novels, and then I do a 5-page thing with her, and we get nominated for Eisner Awards. I was like, I'm working too hard. And so, that was a really positive experience. I've worked with B. Clay Moore on a book called Hawaiian Dick, maybe 15 years ago or so. I can't even remember. There's small handful of writers I've drawn stuff for. Oh, I recently just did a thing with Lonnie Nadler for the band Broken Social Scene. Their best known album, You Forgot It in People, is having its 20th anniversary, and there's a graphic novel coming out that's kind of like built like an anthology where a different artist is kind of drawing a story based on each of the different tracks on the album. It's like high concept stuff, but it's really cool. And so there's one writer kind of writing the whole thing, and then, like I say, different artists for each story. So I got to do one of the bigger stories in that, which was very cool. And all of these writers I have worked with have been very good about, they seem to intrinsically understand that, the artist is a huge part of the storytelling process in comics. Essentially a co-author. And, none of them were like, this is my way or the highway, and, you've got to draw exactly what I wrote on the page and all that stuff. They all, every one of them have, allowed a certain amount of room for me to come in and interpret, what they have written and do my job on the page.
Yeah. And, on the flip side of that, too, I mean, for anyone who has dabbled in comic art at all, or for any aspiring comic book artists out there, it is a lot of work. It is a lot of work.
Yeah. Comics might be a relatively kind of fast read, but they take a long time to make.
For instance, you were saying like the research in some of these was like years and years and years, but for instance, with Bix, like how long did that take you from start to finish to like produce it.
Each of these books was about 3 years, and I'm not talking about 40-hour weeks. I'm talking more like 60 or 80-hour weeks for 3 years. Like, more like 6 years crammed into 3 years. It is a very. I always like to say that, like, no offense to prose authors, many of whom I love and are amazing, but just, in terms of the time taken, you can type the word house a lot faster than you can draw a house. You're doing a lot of visualization so that the reader doesn't have to. And there's still a lot of interpretation when you're reading comics. But yeah, you're doing a lot. Drawing just takes time.
Yes.
it just takes a lot of time.
One of the things that gets brought up a lot at other panels and stuff too with comic artists is the age-old conundrum of the writer saying, and then there's a double-page splash page, all
sure.
These armies. There's 10,000 people on both sides, and then the artist it takes them 2 seconds to write that, and then the artist it's 2 weeks, 2 months of sobbing and just being like, why did they do this to me?
And I do it to myself too. Like, even when the writer and the artist are the same person, the artist in me gets so frustrated with the writer in me. Because I really think in terms of, kind of these big widescreen kind of, you want those, in comics, big moments can literally be big moments with big panels or a splash page or a double page splash. And you want to use that. It's part of the, it's one of the tools in the toolbox. But I mean, there's a couple of examples, like, I don't know, maybe some of you have seen Two Generals, but there's a bit in the middle of here that's like a 2-page spread of the Canadians landing at Juno Beach on D-Day. And like this probably doesn't look like much from the audience, but there's just a million little tiny soldiers and tanks and vehicles and ships and smoking buildings in the background, and that took like a week to draw, and I'm still tired looking at it.
So you wrote it, and then similarly to the
Sure.
what I said before, and then you were like, why did I do this to me?
Yeah, the script said the regiment, landing craft, arrives at Juno Beach and the men disembark or something, right? And I had to spend a week drawing all that.
So on the flip side of that again, too, have you thought about ever just writing and doing scripts for other artists? Adam Gorham, who was in the sketch battle before, talked about how, now he's trying his hand at writing for the first time and not having the art side of it to take care of. Is that something that interests you, or is it kind of just your way or the highway? You want to do your art too?
Mostly not. There was a time in my career where I thought, maybe I'll try to write some stuff for some other artists. Because then I could tell more stories. I got a lot in me. I'm 50 years old and I've been doing this for 20 years, but I still got I'm starting to think about, man, there's probably not as many books coming up as there are behind me, and I got to pick and choose, and I'm not going to get it all out, before I die. and so part of me wants to write stuff and let other people draw it, and then I could do more. But inevitably, I will start writing something, and I'll just be like, I should just draw this. Instead of trying to describe it for someone else the way I see it. I mean, even though I just talked at length about how long drawing takes, sometimes it's just easier than trying to describe it to somebody else. To me, just writing feels like trying to tell a story with one arm tied behind my back, right? I'm missing half the tools in the toolbox. and I start something, and like I say, I miss those tools. I'm like, I could just draw this, faster than I could explain it to somebody.
And I mean, you have mentioned you've been in this industry for about 20 years.
Yep.
Do you find that there's any kind of themes or kind of recurring devices that kind of come up across your stories?
Yeah, I was years deep into my career when I realized that nearly all of my stories are about loyalty. And these are one of these kind of things you find as a writer once you've been doing it for a while. While you're writing the things, and you probably find this too, you don't even necessarily know what you're writing. but hopefully you find it somewhere along the process, to kind of what your theme is. And I find the same is true for the arc of your career, where you'll be a few books in and you'll realize, oh man, I've been circling this same idea the whole time. With all these books. So many of my books are about just people being loyal to each other, to an idea, to a fallen comrade, to any number of things. And honestly, I think it's just wish fulfillment on my part. It's a quality that I find mostly lacking in the real world. And so it's like I say, I think I'm just trying to write it into existence. Lately, I've been it's not out yet, but you mentioned earlier the series I have coming called Squire and Knight, which is being published by First Second in May. It's the first in a series that follows a young squire who's kind of brainy and bookish, and the knight he serves is this kind of overbearing, kind of obnoxious bully. But the squire does all the work and solves all the mysteries, and the knight takes all the credit. And even though it doesn't seem like it at first glance, it's kind of been my pandemic book, because I probably don't need to explain in a lot of detail, but kind of anti-intellectualism is a problem. I kind of was trying to manifest something that was pro-observation, pro-science, pro-education, all that stuff, and have the antagonist reflect the opposite. So clearly something big has happened there in terms of a change in what I'm interested in telling stories about. It's maybe the first thing I've ever written that's not about loyalty in some way, but it is about like I say, it's pro science, pro reading, pro all the thoughtful stuff that the world also needs more of.
It's funny because I think sometimes I've been seeing this online too, where some people aren't entirely aware of the things that kind of move in and out of their stories throughout their career, but then your readers sometimes are just like, oh, I've noticed this thing, and they're like, oh my god, I do that.
Sometimes other people have to point it out to you. Yeah.
But I find even with word echoes, words I didn't even realize I would use over and over again, and then your editor's highlighting and being like, oh, you use this, and it's just I didn't even know this was in my vocabulary so much. And
one of my favorite, you and I were joking about inside the actor's studio when we sat down in these chairs, and there's an old episode of Inside the Actor's Studio with Steven Spielberg. He was the first non-actor they had on the show, and I remember this like it was yesterday. The guy, I can't remember the host's name, but he was like, so Stephen, you've explained to us that your father was a mechanical engineer in the Army and your mother was a piano teacher. So should it be any surprise to us that in Close Encounters, the scientists talk to the aliens by making music on their computers? And Spielberg's jaw just about hits the floor. He had no idea, right? And but he was very grateful. He was very excited to have that pointed out to him. But something that may be so clear to the rest of us when you hear Steven Spielberg's backstory about his parents. It was just like breathing to him, like putting one foot in front of the other. He hadn't even thought about it. It was just completely instinctive.
So for you too, again, you've had 20 years experience. Is there any elements in storytelling that are absolutely essential to you? I'm probably yes. Sure, that's a great answer.
Yeah, I'm sure you didn't mean for that to be a yes or no question, but sure. I'm trying to think of a way to elaborate.
Yeah.
I think about story a lot, all day.
Or what are your most important elements, rather?
Sure.
Different way to...
That's tough. I'm really big on structure. I really, structure being like which scenes you dramatize and how long they are, where they start and where they end, and kind of entering the scene late and leaving it early. All that stuff seems to come fairly naturally to me. But it drives me crazy when I am reading a book or a comic or seeing a movie or something with someone who doesn't think as much about structure, or to whom it doesn't come as naturally, because I mean you're probably the same way, right? Like, it's hard to take your writer hat off. Yeah. It's tough being a writer at the movies.
Yes. Yeah.
Because your story diagnostic tool is always running.
Yes, and I also used to be a reviewer too.
Right.
So
it's
like hard to not think of things critically and like
exactly. Yeah, and it's not. It's not even necessarily that you're being critical. It's just it's so easy to put yourself in the writer's seat, and be like, oh no, like that's that's a mistake, or maybe they pull off a really amazing bit of storytelling sleight of hand, and you're like, wow, that's great. So it helps you appreciate things more as well. But I always find that. Especially in a lot of popular media and stuff like movies, which are, maybe not, more commercially driven than art driven. Seeing a story that's poorly developed, structure wise, just makes me like, come on.
It makes me angry when I see a movie that like an editor clearly has not looked at a script and been like, maybe we should change this, and I'm just like, it took me so long to get this book greenlit.
Right.
Just give me that money.
Yeah, one more draft of that script and you'd have been there, guys. Like a weekend would have made this into a much better movie.
Yes, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
For me, I'm really I know a lot of people break it down to when creating a story, do you focus on the themes or kind of the characters? And for me, it's the characters. I focus on them because to me the themes come organically from building the characters. And
I think for me too, and I'm sure every writer's different. But I find that theme is a thing you kind of find as you're writing.
Yes.
Maybe halfway through the book you kind of realize what you're really writing about, and that's when you go back and start again and do it again, knowing all the things you know now.
And it sounds to me like there's a couple types of writers in the world, I've been told, and it's the plotters who outline everything really heavily, and then the pantsers who just fly by the seat of their pants.
Right.
And I fall into the plotter category.
Right. I think Kurt Vonnegut called them swoopers and bashers. Swoopers kind of swoop in and write a little bit over here and a little bit over there, and then the bashers just start on page 1 and bash it out until they get to the last page.
It would just destroy me.
I find I'm a little bit of both. I kind of outline and plan just enough to sort of improvise the rest. I'd say about 50%. My outlines are always about half finished, and then at that point I'm like, I'll figure it out.
Oh man, yeah. I'm very much I want to have a deeply point form outline to follow and kind of see where that takes me, but leave enough room for it to kind of grow and adapt.
Definitely, because there is that point in the narrative also where the characters kind of take over.
Exactly.
Right. You know the characters well enough that you just let them run free, and they do they behave the way you'd want them to mostly.
I will say too, we still have a bit of time, but if anyone has questions along the way too. Oh yeah.
Were you inspired by any of the other comic artists during your career or reading books?
I'll repeat the question just so everyone can hear in case you can't, but were there any other artists that inspired Scott along the way with your books and style, I'm guessing?
Yeah, I have a couple of big ones. The biggest one for me is Will Eisner, who was a big cartoonist in the 40s. Who I see some heads nodding in the room. Really terrific. Really started, thinking about comics in a really critical and sophisticated and interesting way. Decades before anyone else did. He was doing some really interesting work in the 40s, back when no one was taking comics seriously. And he ended up being one of the fathers of the graphic novel now, kind of the book-length comics in the late 70s. He did a book called A Contract with God and kind of popularized the graphic novel format. And just a really interesting storyteller, really thoughtful storyteller, drew beautifully. I got to meet him once or twice before he passed away in 2005. Was a wonderful man and is my role model. and always owned his own work, which is something I've also tried to do. Like I've never worked for Marvel and DC drawing Spider-Man and Superman and that kind of stuff. I respect that kind of work, but early in my career, I made a decision that I wanted to own, most or everything that I worked on. So, huge role model for me. Another one is Jeff Smith, who some of you may know from Bone, which an incredibly popular series of graphic novels worldwide. I actually just met Jeff last weekend at an event in Columbus, Ohio. It was really terrific. My girlfriend, Irene Valensis, who writes for the Comics Journal, was doing this same thing you and I are doing with him. She moderated his spotlight panel at that event, and they quickly became friends, as many people do with her. And so she kind of got me in. We ended up going out for drinks and stuff afterwards, and it was amazing. But Jeff is has such a kind of appealing drawing style, and he came up through animation, so he has that animator's sense of timing, of comedic timing and dramatic timing, and his stuff is so kind of snappy and just a dream to read his stuff. If you've not read Bone, go read it. It's the best comic ever. Certain other European artists like Yves Chaland, just in terms of design, and I cribbed a lot of him for the dots for eyes, and kind of just the very simple way I'll draw wrinkles in the sleeve of a shirt or something. Thanks. And but I'd say Eisner and Smith for sure. And then after that, there's a kind of a shelf below with probably 10 or 12 people on it. But those are my big ones.
And I think too, talking about people who have ownership of their work, Jeff has also recently done a Kickstarter very successful.
Yep.
I've not read it yet, but there's so many tools and resources now to be able to do your own work, and Jeff has that audience. And
there's not much reason now to not own your own work, unless you're just desperate to draw Spider-Man, which some people are, and if that's what you want, go for it. But the days where there was one career path and it was drawing superheroes for Marvel or DC, that is long gone. Mm-hmm. There's webcomics, obviously. There's self-publishing through Kickstarter. There's any number of book publishers who you don't even want to own your rights. You get the same deal that prose authors get, where you retain everything. And there's not a lot. There never was really, but any reason to sell your rights to your own creations. But now there's even less reason.
Yeah.
There's so many venues now for you to create your own work and own it.
Yeah, and then you don't have studios picking and choosing what stuff that you wrote makes it into a film.
Or firing you off the book that you created. Exactly.
Yeah. We're getting into some fun territory now. Does anyone have any other questions? Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on, you do the writing and then you do the illustration. Do you write first and then illustrate text and then you go through in sequence, or you do a little bit of here and then come back and draw that, whatever you've just written?
Oh, okay. So to reiterate to everyone, what is the process basically for creating the story and then bringing it to life in the art?
Yeah.
A lot of fellow cartoonists think I'm crazy in that I write a pretty detailed script first.
As an editor, I'm immediately going to tell you I appreciate you.
Yes, see, and that's one of the reasons why. I know some people who will just pick up a pencil and a blank piece of paper and start planning out their book visually. And that's how they think, and if that's how they think, it's how they should do it. But I really, we were talking earlier about story development. I really want to get the story kind of nailed down in terms of plot, structure, character, theme, dialogue, that kind of stuff, before I figure out how to interpret it visually. Because I find a lot of comics, as with a lot of other media we've discussed, sometimes the stories aren't as developed as you might like them to be. And I sort of like to do a pass where I just think about story stuff. And as you say, like, you've got to show your editor and your publisher what you're going to do. And you don't want to spend a whole bunch of time drawing. Sometimes the simplest thing is just to write it down and say, this is the story. So I find it helps me, helps the editor, helps the publisher, is just kind of a good thing to do. Now, over the course of my career, my scripts have gotten a little rougher. I used to do very detailed, like, full scripts. And now it's more like dialogue and a little bit of action, but with page breaks. Because the page breaks are so important in comics that every other page you get this. And that is a huge storytelling moment, and you want to use it. So even though I'm not thinking through panel by panel in my scripts anymore, I'm definitely thinking in terms of pages and page turns. From there, hopefully my editor likes what I'm doing, and then I start breaking down the art kind of in rough. I'll do very quick, they're called kind of thumbnail roughs, and I'll do the whole book just really quickly, kind of thumbnail the entire 150, 200 pages, whatever it is. And then I'll send that to them. And that's at least a thing they can kind of look at and sort of read. I've roughed the text in and stuff. It's a very rough version that at least can still be read. And then if they like that, I'll go back in, and again, starting at page 1, I'll start to tighten up those drawings. Still in pencil, but I'll do like tighter, fuller, more finished pencil drawings. Send that back into them again, make sure that everyone's, got their arms and legs in the right place, and and none of the drawings are too wonky or anything. And then comes the inking, which I talked about earlier, is my favorite part. You go over and you ink in all those lines, and it's all fun and nice. And then usually I'll do kind of inks and colors at the same time before they have to see it again. But yeah, it's a real. There's a lot of steps, and they all take a long time. But I kind of like it. I like that you get these kind of 5 or 6 different iterations of the story, because each of them are another opportunity to kind of hammer and polish and revise and rewrite and rethink. And when I'm penciling, I'm not married to my script. And when I'm inking, I'm not necessarily married to what was in the pencils. Like, if there's an opportunity to kind of improve something, I'll go in and improve it. Sometimes at the color change, even as late as the color stage, I will, decide, this scene will work a lot better at sunset, or something like that. Each stage is part of the storytelling, and like I say, an opportunity to think in detail about that part of the storytelling, and I like all the repetition iteration. I mean, it drives some people nuts how long it takes, but I find it kind of exciting, because the book keeps getting better. Ideally, the book keeps getting better at every stage.
Yeah, you're saying too, like some cartoonists just go right in there with the art, but like to me, like again, like that just seems bananas to me. Like I cannot wrap my mind. I worked with an artist once who just hadn't nailed down the script and would start drawing it, but like not like the thumbnails, but like go in and like have an each page.
Jay Fosgett is an artist some of you may have heard of, who is from Michigan and is a really amazing artist, but I've never met anyone quite like him. He seems to be drawing all the time. I'm sure he just wakes up in the morning, grabs the pencil next to his bed, and just starts drawing. And I mean, I draw a lot. I probably draw 10, 12 hours a day, but even I am. I marvel at Jay, like he can't stop. And it's just how he thinks. Like I say, I don't think his brain works if the pencil isn't moving. I think that's why he does it. So, like, sorry, I think I turned myself off there for a second. So, like, I can see how if you are that kind of artist, you probably can't even think about the story without drawing it out simultaneously. I personally can't imagine it, but I can definitely see with some of my colleagues and peers and stuff how that's just how they think. Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you ever find yourself like being stuck in terms of like process? And if so, like how do you get over the rut, or like find yourself in like a analysis
Yeah.
Creative block.
So kind of like, writer's block or artist block or stuff like that. Yeah, I mean, I think we all do. Some days it feels like your talent is there and it's coming naturally and it's all good. And then other days you're like, where did my talent go? Did I leave it in my other pants? It's what I found works is because I've been doing this for so long, so kind of regularly, is that just having a regular schedule. Like I'm at the desk X number of hours a day starting at this time, and that's when I do my creative work. Some days it comes easy, some days it's a little harder, but I find just sitting down at the desk, keeping that routine, getting it done. Maybe today wasn't as good as yesterday, but tomorrow will probably be better, right? But the books have got to get done, and the only way to do it is button the seat and do it. And you can't be super precious about every drawing because you got to get on to the next one and then the next one. It's a volume business. And I find that just works. I find just going to the desk, sitting down, work, cranking it out, even when I'm not in the mood, is it's how the sausage gets made. And I find like I know other people will go for a walk or play Xbox or whatever they do, and sometimes I'll do that stuff too. But 9 times out of 10, I find the inspiration I'm looking for is at the desk and not somewhere else.
Sometimes too, it's like sometimes you're like so hyper focused on the one thing you're working on.
Sure.
So like for me, and not to detract from the Scott Chantler the talk here, but like having the ability to then like refocus on something else, even if it's just like a side passion project for like a little bit, sometimes just like helps to realign your brain and like you're working on something else and you're like, oh yeah, that's what I want for this other thing, and it's like
sometimes. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be a side project, but sometimes stepping away from it does help in that, like, I know a lot of people probably have this experience where you're doing some task and you can't figure it out, and then you go to bed and your mind relaxes, and just as you're falling asleep, there's the idea you've been looking for all day. I mean, I think that's probably true in many people's line of work, not necessarily just this one. But yes, yeah, sometimes just shifting your focus a little bit or just relaxing.
Yes.
Like I found with creativity in general, you don't want to be in a kind of a tight, place about it. You want to like the good ideas and the good work come when you're a bit relaxed.
It's hard because, writing, drawing, all that is like, it's usually starts as a passion. Who in here is like drawing? Are you an artist? Any aspiring artists?
I'll bet there's some artists in here. Yep.
And it's your passion, right? You like drawing,
Yeah.
You like doing that. And I love that I get to write for a living. And
Sure.
I'm sure you love that you get to be creative for a living. But
Totally.
it then there's a difference sometimes when it's like your passion versus
Versus your job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's like hard sometimes to then separate this thing that you love from something that's like paying the bills.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Time to be creative. That's not exactly how it works, but it can. Like I say, for me at least, discipline sort of became part of the routine. Mm-hmm. I can force myself to be creative if I have to.
Yeah.
And I guess that's a great segue, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you was, how did you take the passion of being a kid with a blank piece of paper and kind of invest in it to make it your career, so it actually pays you bills?
I mean, it wasn't easy. Yeah, you kind of asking sort of how I was able to make that transition, just kind of practical.
Hold on and keep on, right?
Yeah, I mean,
An artist.
like, part of it is just doing it. Like, whether you want to, be a basketball player or a, piano player or whatever, you got to be playing basketball and playing the piano. Like, kids don't always want to hear it, but, practice is what separates you from the kid across town who's trying to do the same thing. But beyond that, it also requires a lot of, kind of perseverance. Like, I was about 30 by the time I broke in, which doesn't seem old to me now, but certainly seemed then like, oh man, I'm coming to this really late. But yeah, like I said earlier, it wasn't good timing in the comics business for me at first. It took a while for the business to kind of get to a place where it was going to be receptive to the kind of work I wanted to do, and for opportunities to appear. And then I started this webcomic in the year 2000, like I said earlier, just as a kind of a lark for fun to kind of scratch that storytelling itch. And somebody who was already doing comics ended up reading that strip and getting a hold of me. So, I mean, that was lucky in one respect, but I had also put myself out there to be found. So that was a big part of it. And then I just, that publisher who him and I ended up working with, I did some good work for them, and then we did some more work for them, and then that allowed me to start pitching my own stuff. I'm anything but an overnight success. I've been building one small block at a time for decades. But at least it's always been going the right direction. I have always done well enough to want to keep going, which I'm grateful for. But yeah, a little bit of luck, a lot of stubbornness, and talent is certainly part of it. And like I say, dedication is part of it. Like, do your work, do whatever that thing is you want to do, and kind of figure out how to get paid for it at some point. But the important thing is doing it. No one's going to pay you for it if you're not doing it.
I think it's an important thing to note here, too, is you've been in the industry for, again, 20 years, and realistically, graphic novels, and there's still kind of a stigma about them. There's almost like a snobbery to prose versus graphic novels, and not being like a valid form of reading.
Yeah.
It's changed very much in the last decade or so with, the middle grade, the rise of the middle grade graphic novel and stuff,
Yeah.
but it's been, you were working on graphic novels before it was like a trendy mainstream thing, and
Right.
that's you're clawing your way
Right.
to be recognized and get your stuff out there in a market like that.
Right. Yeah, timing was definitely a big part of it. 2003 or so was kind of the breakthrough year for graphic novels in bookstores. It was the year of Craig Thompson's Blankets and Jimmy Corrigan by Chris Ware, and certain things like that. And it was huge, and it was perfect timing for me. Like I said, I always wanted to do comics, grew up wanting to do them, but my style doesn't really suggest superheroes and stuff. And so, by the time I was kind of in my early 30s, all these publishers were suddenly wanting to publish graphic novels and anything but superheroes. And I thought I'd kind of missed it. But it turns out I was right on time for for this other thing, which I liked a lot better, frankly. And timing has certainly been a big part of my career and whatever success I've had.
So we are nearly out of time here. We've got about 5 minutes left, but if somebody has one more question we can ask. Anyone? I know there's a lot of pressure. I was just one more question.
The last question, it better be good.
Okay. Well, I mean, last call. Oh, okay, yeah.
It's a general question. If you do, did you ever procrastinate? And if you do, how do you overcome it?
So, do you procrastinate, and how do you kind of overcome that? I don't.
You don't procrastinate, or you don't overcome it?
That one.
Okay, I gotcha. I mean, this is a pretty boring answer, but like I said earlier, I've over the years and decades, frankly, I've gotten this down into kind of a routine where I kind of know what my work hours are, and then I make sure I don't work during the non-work hours so that I get a little reward at the end of the day, and that makes it a lot easier to just, I work from 10 to 6, I'm at the desk, and then after dinner I go back to the desk for a couple hours for a bit of a night shift, but, other than those times, I don't draw. I don't try to even think about stories. It's hard, like I said earlier. But I just find the discipline of doing this day after day, year after year, has kind of trained me to these are the hours a day when I work, and I still enjoy my work after all this time. So I don't do a lot of convincing myself to do other things. Sometimes I'll play hooky, especially on Friday afternoon. I live within walking distance of several really good pubs in Stratford. And sometimes on Friday afternoon, I'm just like, Freelance Friday, I'm going to the pub. And, other than that, and, frankly, I figure I've earned that. I've earned the Friday afternoon at the pub after all these years. I'm usually pretty good, just by kind of staying disciplined and kind of sticking to certain work hours and not working during the other hours.
Well, that is all we have time for. So thank you all for coming, and give Scott a big round of applause, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks to Stephanie and Scott for agreeing to have themselves recorded for this podcast. And thanks to the Mississauga Public Library for hosting the Mississauga Comic Expo. You can discover more about Scott on Twitter at Scott Chantler and online at scottchantler.com. You can discover more about Stephanie on Twitter at Hello Cookie and online at stephaniecook.com. And thanks to you for listening to the True North Country Comics Podcast. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to and like this podcast on Apple Podcasts. And please leave a good rating. Also check out the TrueNorthCountryComics.com website and follow along on Twitter at True North Comics. True North Country Comics is now on YouTube. Please like and subscribe to that video channel and hit the notification button. Please send your feedback to John at TrueNorthCountryComics.com. Thanks again for listening, and come back soon for another episode. Bye for now. True North Country Comics Podcast is copyright True North Country Comics, copyright 2022.